for those who could not, who were smart enough to go for a bike ride tonight. No, of course, this is going to be a great meeting. I can see that they would be torn, but or they had other commitments. So that's what we'll do. We'll have people put things in the, and staff can help us sort them out. But we remind people to put things in the form of a question. So have a question for staff, and to say which ward it's applicable to. We'll probably recognize it, but that will just make it a little faster. And we got great attention. So we'll start very shortly. So we also have staff here from this as well. We have staff from all the 4 councillor ward offices. So they'll be helping us out as well with the questions. So, okay, so I will, I'll just pass it over to you, Jeff, to say hello, and then to Councillor Brockington and Councillor.
Thanks, and I'm sure we want to get into the presentation fairly quickly, but I will say hello. I'm Jeff Leiper. I'm the City Councillor for Kitchissippi Ward. We are really fortunate to have some fantastic cycling infrastructure in Kitchissippi, the Scott Street Spine, for example. But I think critical to the sustainability of the city is going to be to help people get from the other wards, from Bay Ward and from College Ward, from River Ward, down into some of that key spine infrastructure that we have, especially given the light rail. So I'm always interested in cycling infrastructure right across the city, but I have a real interest in hearing how the discussion unfolds tonight with this particular grouping of wards in the near West End.
Thank you. Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Theresa, and good evening, everyone. Riley Brockington, Councillor for River Ward. Thank you all for coming. Before I forget, I'll just mention that South End councillors, including River Ward, will be hosting a meeting on May the 27th. Gloucester, Southgate, Alta Vista, and River Ward will be meeting to focus on South End cycling infrastructure in particular. So if you enjoyed tonight and want a second round, you are more than welcome to join us next week. City investment in cycling infrastructure in River Ward is nothing to brag about. It is bare bones and it's insufficient. And I hope through the transportation master plan process, residents like yourself will help focus the discussion on active transportation and where the city needs to focus in the years to come. One of them that we're focusing on tonight is cycling. So I very much appreciate this conversation and listening to the feedback that this session and others will generate, because we really do need to push active transportation in this city. So I'm here tonight to listen. Thank you very much for coming. And if any River Ward residents want to follow up after tonight, by all means, please reach out. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chiarelli.
Active transportation's become more important in the last 4 people actually on both sides of it in our ward. And the way that the push toward active transportation has concerns for seniors and mobility challenged people. So I'd want to be looking at that as well. But
thank you.
Good to see everyone here.
Okay. Okay. So my next job will be to introduce the panelists for tonight. This is city staff who've been working hard on these issues. This is Latko Krislik, Project Manager, Active Transportation Planning, Robin Bennett, Project Manager, Cycling Programs, and Deborah Lightman, Senior Project Manager, Transportation Planning. Welcome to you all, and thank you for coming out tonight. So we'll hand it over to you to do your presentation.
Thank you, councillors. I'll just share my screen. So hopefully that's shown up. So thanks for everyone that's with us tonight. I see we have over 100 people joining, so that's great participation. So the idea of tonight in terms of what we'd like to share and communicate and what we'd like to receive from the participants is, first of all, giving you an overview of the actual process behind the update of the active transportation plan, including cycling and pedestrian facilities. That is a part of the overall transportation master plan that's now being updated. And then we'll talk about some sort of general questions and issues that have come up, and we'll share some background, in particular issues that may relate to the boards being covered tonight. And then, as mentioned, we hopefully will have time to see questions come up in chat. And then councillors can pull those questions up and we'll see if we can sort of discuss them. Now, in many cases, we won't have an answer to a question, but it's really good to understand what the issue is and hear more about it. And so we'll proceed on that basis. Now, in the first part, if councillors would like to comment or add comments or pull up a related chat to one of these slides, please do. Please feel free to do so. So I'll get started. So to give some history to those of you that may not have been following these active transportation plans, the first one that came out that was a separate plan in the consolidated city of Ottawa was 2018 and 19. And at that point in time, I'd call it an aspirational plan because it laid out a whole bunch of networks that were desired, but it did not really establish funding for those projects. So funding trickled in. In some years, it might have been $400,000, really wasn't enough to make progress against such a big need. In 2013, the TMP and the cycling pedestrian plans were updated, and that was a very significant threshold because the project lists that were laid out over from 2013 to 2021 actually had long-term financial plan money reserved that was believed to be enough to implement those phases. So the project called for a bunch of facilities, which we assumed we would have enough money to build. And it also brought in some major new policies, which actually have shown quite a bit of impact over those years. For example, we suggested doing a pilot on winter cycling. We now have a winter cycling network that's been growing a little bit every year. There was the multimodal level of service. And I do see around the table the fact that you're looking at qualitative issues for cyclists and pedestrians on a road corridor starting to really change the debate that used to be there before. So now we're in the threshold of updating those plans from 2013. So they are still in force until such time as the new plan is approved. And so that's going to be a bit of a longer process. So we don't expect it to be completed, the update, until 2023. Partly it's because of some surveys that we're doing that were sort of disrupted by the pandemic and so on. But nevertheless, we're going to make a very big step in the active transportation plans this fall, which is using sort of the same methodology in 2013. We're going to look at the funding we expect to get, and then some. We'll have some headroom, and lay out the plans we think of the projects we want to do for a 10-year period after the plan is approved. And so that's going to come out this fall. The other parts of it that are more policy-based and deciding how aggressive we're going to be with modal share, they come with the transportation master plan wrap up in the next couple of years. So we are, speaking about how we're going to come up with this list of projects. We actually had an awful lot of input from years past, including, by the way, last fall, we had feedback from thousands of residents on an online survey. And we look at our policies in terms of what kinds of linkages are important. So right now we're just at this stage here where we've collected an awful lot of input and ideas with our consultants. And the next big piece of input we want is the priorities of our ward councillors, because they have obviously a strong perspective in their wards, and we want to really understand where their priorities are. And from everything I've seen, the challenge we will face is not to come up with excellent, worthwhile projects. The challenge we'll have is to decide which of all those good things that we could do are the ones that we'll actually pick to implement. So that's going to be our next step after we're done these Q&A sessions, is to streamline them down to something that fits the budget, and then you'll see them this fall. One of the basic questions that has come up is related to, for example, if it's a 10-year plan, then do we not change it over that 10 years? Well, the answer is a little bit complicated, because we don't expect to change that plan over the next 10 years unless council decides that we want to go and do the update earlier. I mean, it could, for example, be done in 5 years' time. The second way it can change is through all the other projects, all the other funds that we have in the city, including the possibility of extra federal money that's tied to some projects and so on and so forth. So we have found that our list of projects from 2013 has not changed much at all, but other projects have come up funded through other sources, which is always a possibility. The question is, how much do you spend on cycling and pedestrians in the bigger context of the Transportation Master Plan? As you can see from the figures at the bottom, it's relatively small. It's somewhere in the order of 3 to 4% of the total TMP. By far and away, transit is getting most of it. But I would say, though, that the funding we expected up to 2031, we've pretty much got that much funding already at 2021. So there's been more money put in that let us accelerate the program. This gives you a sort of a visual perspective on some of the online consultations that we did, including a request for missing links last fall. And something similar will show up this fall. And those of you that remember 2013 will have squiggles on here that identify the various projects that we're proposing. So it's a very big city, so you'd be able to zoom into the areas of interest that you have and comment on those projects. This gives you a visual of the sort of feedback we got last fall, where people put in something like 4,500 push pins with their different comments and so on. So this is a sort of a zoom in, and you can see that there's various comments, pedestrian missing links and so on. And in some cases, people put in very detailed information, which we may use once we get to the implementation phase. So I know from our past work we have done, this kind of information is useful over the long term, especially if we get a lot of data through the survey, which in this particular case we did. One of the major comments and challenges that we get when we talk about our cycling plan in particular, because it's very much a network-based sort of solution that you want to reach, is, don't you know that the bike lane ended right here? And why don't you do the whole thing? And why do you only do one bit and not the whole thing? Well, sometimes it does take a number of years of effort to complete a route, but the key is that we have decided on a network to focus. That doesn't mean we work on it exclusively, but to try to focus on completing connectivity along this network, bikeway network. And I think we've been quite successful in doing that. In fact, some of these yellow lines that are not yet completed would be done immediately, for example, when the baseline BRT comes in. So if we include what we've built and what's kind of in the pipeline, I think we've come to very close to having good completion rates. If you look at the overall program, there's a lot of focus on how many kilometers of facilities, although I think that what we want to emphasize a little more than that is the quality of the facilities. And that includes, I believe we're the absolute leader in Canada, if not North America, in protected intersections. And we're building many, many more. We've had a very successful PXO program to help people cross roads. And although it was really only started a few years ago, we've built a large number of them. And it's been a great tool to make things far easier for pedestrians. If you look at the ward grouping that we have with us tonight, if we look at recently completed, that's within the last year or two, there's a few projects, as you can see on the map here, and hopefully many of you have had a chance to experience them. But there's also a large number of projects in the queue. So that'll be either completed this year or in the next year or possibly two, but basically within the next 2 years. And so this is over and above what we may add in the new plan over the 10-year period. So looking at some of the big new initiatives within this ward grouping, I think one of the biggest ones is our opportunity to improve the active transportation level of stress, reduce the level of stress across these 4 major MTO crossings of the 417. This is the degree of the rebuild is very significant. So the MTO thinks that the work that they're going to do should last 75 years. So this is an opportunity we don't want to miss. And fortunately, we have actually been working with them for years now, since 2018, to work out the kind of design we'd like to see over these structures. So this is coming on pretty quickly. And so the MTO wants to start construction depending on which one, which overpass.
Can you say what MTO is, please?
The Ministry of Transportation for Ontario. So my apologies. They are the highway authority. They own and pay for all the highways in Ontario, the 400 series in the north, many other non-400s. And so basically they're the provincial transportation authority. Their responsibility includes not only the highways, but the overpasses and interchanges. However, from a policy point of view, they don't pay for cycling facilities. So there's a negotiation that has to go on, and we may have to chip in towards these crossings. Here's an example of one of those 4. This particular one, an EA, was completed a couple of years ago for Maitland. And so you can see it looks very, very different than today. A lot of the geometry of the ramps has been squared off so that you're not dealing with super high speed turns where from a cyclist or a pedestrian point of view, they come at you from your back shoulder. And to the degree possible, protection is provided, a separation and a curb from traffic. It's a very different experience than crossing this particular overpass today. So we should find out soon in the next months exactly how this is going to work out, and I think it'll have a big impact on our plan going forward. This is an example of one of the bikeways we've been focusing on. And if you look at the section of it from Scott Street to Saint Laurent, this is about 12 kilometers, and we have spent 7 years working on that in concentrated effort to get to 100% basic connectivity. There's a bike lane where it's needed. And since then, we've done a lot of qualitative upgrades in all kinds of ways. For example, even Hemlock was resurfaced with buffering, and we continue to add bike tracks along Beechwood and lots of protected intersections coming along Scott. And that's the importance of having a corridor that you define. This is an important cycling corridor. And so looking forward, what are we going to focus on next? Well, the quality improvements aren't stopping along this particular part of the bikeway, but we also are going to initiate an extension of the bikeway to Bell's Corners, and you can see it here up to Acres Road. So if you look at this section, there are already a number of projects that are in planning. So at Golden, we hope to get a better intersection at Golden, including a direct link up to Scott. So you avoid the very congested area of parking and shopping through Richmond Road. Further along, the stage 2 is going to build completely protected bike tracks after they're done their trenching and so on for their project. Then there's also a resurfacing project going on all the way from Bayshore Drive to Pinecrest, and we're going to look at putting bike tracks there and improve sidewalks, which is much needed. Bayshore Drive interchange is being reworked by stage 2. And as I mentioned earlier, the MTO, Ministry of Transportation, is looking to rehab this overpass over the 417. And we want to get a safe facility there that ties into all the other work which we've been integrating along the corridor. Now, there'll still be some sections left over that will be missing links that we'll consider in the new plan, but quite a bit of this is already underway outside of the new plan. One of the most significant and impactful projects will be the active transportation upgrades. Once we get the baseline BRT project underway, it is a massive project. It's got a great continuity in terms of it's a nice straight route. And it will have, as you can see in these drawings, it will have proper facilities, bike tracks, separated spaces for pedestrians. And it's going to also solve some very, very difficult, hard to get from A to B challenges, because there'll be a facility that allows you to connect from Fairlane up to Maryville. Now, it is true that this particular project is, although we're virtually done the detailed design, it's not funded, but it's obviously high in everybody's priority list. And so that one will be extremely impactful once it's funded and built. So we also have some questions that were raised about connectivity in this area. And we'd very much like to see, if you look at these links, if you can add your comments, those of you that are familiar with this area, in the chat, in terms of where would we prioritize, where are the links that we need to prioritize, keeping in mind that we should have something on baseline once this major project occurs. One issue that came up, and Councillor Kavanagh, you'd be very familiar with this one, is the challenge in going north-south across Carling between the transitway, if you will, and the place where Richmond Road crosses Carling. And so there is a massive redevelopment going on of Lincoln Fields Shopping Centre. And we've opened up discussions, and thanks to the councillor as well, to open up the door. And so far, they're interested in seeing if they can improve the north-south connectivity. And I think this obviously would be a huge benefit, since it's very difficult otherwise to see how we can make a lot of progress given the road grid there. So we're very much following up on that, and hopefully we'll have some news if the discussions go in a positive direction. So there's a couple of questions in here that we hear often. One that comes up quite a bit is the friction and the conflict of cyclists and pedestrians on pathways. Now, obviously, that often is a comment made about the NCC pathways, particularly in these times when everybody's out. And the NCC, if you've looked at their new strategic plan, which just came out, I think in 2019, they have a definitive plan to either widen or separate cyclists and pedestrians. Now that won't happen instantaneously, but they are definitely looking at that, and they accept that that has to happen. I would also say that as the city is building out in a reasonably attractive on-road network that's more direct, we're taking some of those cyclists, particularly some of the ones that are going a little too fast, off of the pathways. And we have actually seen that impact in the numbers from our counters. If you say compare the Scott Albert Laurier corridor with what's happening on the Ottawa River pathway. The other question is about better connections to the NCC network, and we are certainly talking to them about very specific small connectors. And I think that the discussion, if you look at the overall plan that we have in the city, is as our network gets developed, including the north-south links, that would just automatically provide much better access to the NCC pathways. I mean, a great example of that is, first of all, what we've done on Boo Street, and then of course, the Trillium pathway. And there's even further enhancements in terms of interconnectivity planned there. The business of getting along in terms of the behaviors of cyclists and pedestrians is certainly a long-term challenge. And I do agree that it's a matter of getting new behaviors in place. And it's always interesting that cyclists get annoyed when someone buzzes by in a car, and they may do that to a pedestrian on the pathway and just not appreciate the negative impact that causes. And so we have been doing various kinds of programs along with the NCC, and we're trying all kinds of different things. And ultimately, we just have to get the social connection and message across. I don't know that ordering people to do things is going to be super effective, but I think maybe changing the mindset is something that we're certainly going to try to do and look at best practices in other cities. Another area that we received some questions about, as well as lots of comments in the push pins, is the area, let's say, south of Walkley between Sawmill Creek and Riverside. And how do we improve connectivity there? I mean, today, apart from Sawmill Creek, none of these roads have formal cycling links. However, we are in the planning phase of a facility along Walkley. And that'll take some time. It's tied in with various LRT works, but ultimately that will be complete from Riverside all the way to Bank Street. And then Bank Street in turn will have bike tracks all the way north to the Rideau River. So that'll be a big enhancement in connectivity. And the question is, what are the other links that are should be included to enhance that initial first step? Councillor Brockington has certainly discussed with me the need to go south on Riverside from Walkley. But we're also looking at should McCarthy be improved to Riverside, given that we have a facility there. And then residents have commented that this is not a comfortable section along this bend with Paul Anka. So if you could, those of you that use this area, perhaps provide some comments in the chat, it would be very welcome. A very specific question about a rather obvious, well, I mean, I don't know if I could find the person that did this design originally. I'd certainly like to ask them why there was an offset. Perhaps there was a good reason for it at the time. But this is something that we could tackle with, we have a program to put in accessible crossings that include obviously not only just the curb cut, but a tactile strip, as well as we could consider a PXO here, I mean, depending on the traffic levels. And I think that would be an example where one of our smaller programs, which does projects all over the city, could be very effective. And then if there are specific locations that in addition are priorities, then that's what that program's for, and they can be submitted to us through the councillors or directly to staff. Now, for those of you that have been familiar with the what's been evolving with e-bikes, particularly in terms of what's allowed and what the policies and rules are, they are starting to become far more common, and we're going to see them more and more. They're lagging in North America compared with Europe in terms of ubiquity, but that's going to change. So the province has been looking at a bunch of regulations to define different types of e-bikes. Their first attempt years ago was extremely broad. It was too broad, and they're trying to tighten it up. The city's engaged in that debate through our various organizations that we join. And so we know that after the rule setting is done with the regulations, which probably will take a couple of months, we'll then have to do our own bylaw changes to determine where they're allowed. Now, the specific thing about cargo bikes is a specific opportunity if cities want to allow them under road through bylaws, and we're definitely looking at that. The comments about surfaces, I mostly get this on sidewalks that, let's say often they've been asphalt paved years and years ago and tree roots have buckled them. And they're extremely difficult for many people, particularly that if walking is somewhat difficult. And we are speaking with our asset management staff. I mean, maybe we need to reconsider when those things are redone. And when they're rebuilt, typically they're going to be rebuilt in concrete, so there'd be much better surfaces. However, unfortunately, there is a big backlog, and that is more of an asset management issue than a planning issue, but we do want to be involved in that policy setting about quality standards. This last item, shade for active transportation facilities, I'm absolutely convinced that that's going to be vital to our active transportation networks in the future, because yes, there is a small average increase in temperatures, but the increase in extremely high heat days is going to be very big, and there's going to be too many days where you don't want to leave your house because it's too hot. And shade makes a big difference. So in fact, we're doing some research with U Ottawa to look at predictive models for shade corridors. And we're going to include that in our policy. And I think it's an extremely important point going forward. Sidewalks being wider, we do have sidewalks that are 1.6 meters, and sometimes they squeeze even a bit lower, but our new standard is 2 meters, and we're getting it in most circumstances. Very occasionally we have to skinny it down to 1.8, but certainly we're looking at a minimum of 2 meters as being the target. Expanding the cycling network, if you look at that crosstown bikeway map that I showed, that's the way that we're going to focus our money, our limited money on the missing links. But lots of other projects are going to be bringing in protective facilities like stage 2, like rapid transit. And believe me, we're doing that as quickly as we can. And we're looking for input to see how that network maybe needs to be denser. And I would say that, quite frankly, we got serious about the cycling network in 2010 in terms of making big investments and trade-offs. And so, it's going to take some more years before we're ubiquitous. Lately, we have been adding lighting on multi-use pathways. So far, it's been pretty much limited to links to transit. And so it's expensive, but it is being considered now for every project. And occasionally we'll retrofit lighting to an existing pathways. Safe crossings, I think the answer there is we're certainly doing protected intersections and we're doing lots more PXOs for pedestrian crossings. And we're going to see a lot of these new protected intersections in these wards. There's some good examples, for example, on Fisher around Dines and so on, to give you a feeling for what these are going to look like. And you're going to see a whole batch more within a year. Lots of concerns about winter maintenance, and people have been challenging, you know, the standards. Like, well, what is the standard on the sidewalk relative to the road, and so on and so forth. So that's being reviewed. There's a comprehensive review underway right now, and you can provide your input into that. And so there's been a lot documented on this process. So if that's something that you want to engage in, this is a great time to do it. And going back to the active transportation plan, we'll reinforce that with policy. We'll definitely have a role to play in that. All right, so how are we doing for time here? It's 7. So I think at this point, you know, I'll open up the floor if there hopefully have been a number of comments or questions in the chat that councillors want to pull out and see if we can offer any comments.
Yeah, Connie has been sending me the questions that have come up in the chat that I can put towards you. And you know, people have marked them for which area. I'll start off with the Bay Ward one, and it was about a safe link between Crystal Beach and Bell's Corners along Moody. And this was promised as LRT work. We've been told there's no space allocated to cross 417 at Moody. I'll take that one because I dealt with it today. If you're okay with that, Zlatko. It came up with because we had a presentation at FEDCO committee today on the stage 2 LRT. I've been dealing with this already. What happened is we asked KEV, that is the construction company that's building the LRT system, to make a MUP for us across the Moody Bridge. And they came back with a price tag that was really, really high. And it was sticker shock. So the city is going to get someone else to do it. They are still doing it. I've got that committed today in a public meeting, but I just wanted you to know they are committed to doing it. It's just Kev's not doing it, but it will get done. So that's what's happening with that.
And Councillor, I can add that that's certainly one of the high profile projects in the next plan, active transportation plan, to extend that facility from where stage 2 ends at the off ramp, you know, down into Bell's Corners.
Yes, and I appreciate that's it's not just over the bridge. There's a lot more to do there. So yes, thank you for the question on that. Just looking, is there cooperation and consultation with NCC? I think that's a general question. And Zlatko, I can tell you I had a meeting with them this week and I plan to do it regularly because there's always so many things we need to talk about, but you can talk about from the city perspective.
Yes, we do have, first of all, we're strongly engaged in their strategic plan update. We meet with them on a regular basis, and we are also working towards a memorandum of understanding for joint projects where, you know, we're going to do some of it, but it's important they do their bit. I was in a meeting today with the NCC talking about some of these strategic issues. We also have a periodic forum with the 3 key entities here, Gatineau, Ottawa, and the NCC, because a lot of issues from a cyclist point of view, you want some commonality, you want to talk about where winter links go across the river. So the answer is yes, we talk to them very regularly. We have a number of projects that are jointly coupled.
Okay, great. I got a Ward 15 question from Dave Robertson. How will we plan to evolve our cycling infrastructure design? Will we be planning year-round use, no paint, so that we can add a winter cycling network, wide pathways planned for predicted volume, segregated between at modes, eliminate curbs in transition zones between roads and cycle track? We need to build heavenly cycle infrastructure to boost the model share.
Dave, I'm going to take that as feedback since I can't answer each one sort of particularly. Clearly, you know, this is what you're advocating for. I fully agree with where you're going. The design guidelines for transportation projects constantly evolve. The last sort of major change that we saw was the complete streets that introduced various you know, design concepts that we would try to implement. And then over the course of however long, design guidelines will continue to change. So even the protected intersections, for example, are constantly being updated with the most recent best practices. When we build cycling infrastructure, we'll probably still have the complete streets lens on them to determine whether or not or what level of cycling infrastructure we're going to build. Segregated lanes that are winter maintainable probably aren't going to go on less traveled 30km/h low volume streets. I could probably talk all night about it. I won't. Design guidelines are something that are in a state of constant flux, and we just have to keep advocating for the city to keep those up to date with the most recent best practices.
Thank you, Councillor. I might add that I'm not 100% thrilled with the build quality in some facilities, and I think we are going to look to our standards to improve that. And I think one of the comments about curb free is something we're looking at if what's meant by that is to take an asphalt from a road up on, say, a raised bike track without an intermediate concrete transition. For example, we have that on Laurier. Some of you will note when you're going eastbound over Elgin, nice smooth jog up. And so I think those things have been noted, and we certainly want to improve those qualitative factors as well.
I just want to thank Bike Ottawa, who do a great job of staying on top of a lot of the cycling projects that go in. And with each one, the comments that they are providing in terms of suggestions for how to better design those, they have momentum, so that, you know, the next project that's designed is designed better. And for those of you who are interested in cycling infrastructure, I know Bike Ottawa can use volunteer help. There are a ton of projects that aren't necessarily cycling projects. We have a very large street rebuild coming up in the ward along Byron, Athlone, and Highcroft. And Byron is going to see some beefier cycle tracks and infrastructure protected intersections. Those are the sorts of things that having Bike Ottawa's eyes on are really helpful for staff to make sure that we're designing according to the most recent best practices, and to make sure that future projects are designed from the outset with those kind of best practices in mind. So I'll put a little plug in for joining Bike Ottawa and helping out with their advocacy group, because it's a lot of projects that happen in the city that may not actually be primarily cycling projects, but have a really strong cycling component that need to be watched and commented on.
Okay. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep, thanks, Theresa.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, my internet just said it was having a bad connection. That's all it said. Great. Another question for you is to do with Scott Street and about the surface, and will it be damaged by new construction?
Good question. Scott Street is actually going to be fairly rough over the next few years. Some of the new construction is going to damage the road. Scott Street will be entirely detoured onto the multi-use path for the duration of the LRT detour onto Scott. Although, sorry, I think there's there is a westbound lane that will go on the south side of the street as well. When it's all done and wrapped up, the street's going to be repaired, and it will actually see some significant new cycling infrastructure that will be in very good shape. But it is going to be rough for a few years. I don't want to minimize that.
Okay, thank you. For River Ward, will any trees be sacrificed? Copeland Park to Maryvale. Riley, do you want to take that, or Zlatko?
I think staff should be answering these questions, not councillors. So I'll yield to staff.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I think that probably is associated with a project, and I think maybe we'd have to get back on that question after we identify, what project the concern is related to.
I can post a link. This is for the baseline, the cycling facilities being added as part of the baseline bus rapid transit project. I can put a link in the chat to the most recent designs that have been shared, and we can look into it further if that doesn't clarify.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Deb. So yeah, those detailed plans probably will pretty much, and also we have an IS project manager on that file that could answer that very specific question.
Okay, thank you. In terms of crosstown routes, you're including Richmond, the complete streets for Richmond, combined with traffic lane, and we're talking about the section between Bayshore and Pinecrest. Do we have timelines on that?
I think it's within 3 years because we're getting a lot of pressure to resurface that roadway. So we're starting that functional design very, very soon. And so depending on, sometimes we can move schedules around, but it's definitely a short-term objective to get that section of roadway not only resurfaced, but upgraded in terms of active transportation. Yes, please. It's a need. People are just parked on the side, and we've had issues with that. For Riverboard, Clyde Avenue at Baseline westbound is downhill and cyclists are not seen there very easily. Is there anything being done about that? Not at present. So that isn't something that, there's nothing currently in the works as far as I know. If it's a very specific a safety concern, we can flag it to the safety team, although, in some cases there's perhaps may not be a lot of ways to mitigate it. But so far, I don't have a project identified, and so we'll see if anything comes out in the next once we select our projects. Okay, thank you. For River Ward, cycling routes could provide a good opportunity to pilot solar roadways. Lots of examples in the US has this been considered to give such a pilot. Particularly would be great for winter cycling. Well, I want to be careful if I understand exactly what's intended by the question. So I don't want to speculate. Maybe someone could be more specific what they mean by a solar route. I mean, generally, it may be if the intention is to keep some of these routes, out of the shade in winter. I agree that has some benefit, but anyways, it's not something we're actively working on unless I misunderstood the comment. Yeah, solar roadways. So I guess we'll need more details. I have heard of it before, but not anyway. For Kitchissippi, increased use of Scott Street by buses that are going to be coming off right down the SJAM. Will the bike lanes along Scott be segregated with a medium from the main car and bus traffic?
For the most part, Zlatko, actually, I think you've been working with me on that project to make sure that there is segregated alternatives to being on the road. And I know we have we had a recent public open house on that. Are you able to address that, or Deb? I can't remember who I've been working with on that one.
Well, I think Deb probably had the most intimate knowledge.
Yeah.
In short, the entire route, particularly eastbound is the question, because that'll be closer to the traffic, is going to be curb segregated wherever curbs are feasible. Obviously, we can't block driveways. And as you get east of Holland, it gets a lot better because we have a lot more room for buffering. Deb, is there some other comment you wish to add to that?
No, just that it is a mix of cycle tracks and bike lanes separated by pinned curbs, concrete barrier curbs throughout the length to support winter maintenance.
And I should say in the westbound direction, there'll be full separation and segregation.
Yeah, and that was a bit of a discussion, but I'm really pleased that staff have taken the need to have segregated detour there to Hart, and it will also be winter maintained, right, Deb?
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, Theresa.
No problems. This is one I'm familiar with. Crossing Carling near the 19th tee. This is way out west, almost to Canada, at Burke, at Burke Street. There's the scary railroad bridge underpass where cars must go single file with bikes. It's too narrow. Any plans on that?
Yes, yes, I just want to state that I'm extremely familiar with that scenario. And it is certainly going to be one of the things that we're going to look at, do a feasibility study and how to improve that. It's a problem in two senses. It's a problem for east-west cyclists on the shoulder that disappears, as well as north-south, the connectivity on the NCC pathways that are crossing at Burke without any signals or any, you're dealing with very high-speed traffic. So it's a tricky problem, but we definitely want to look at it and come forward with more significant approaches. Like up till now, we've put up a couple of signs, a single file. So we want to do better than that, but we're going to do a study.
Yeah, that's great. And what about the line over top? Because that is now a not used rail line.
Well, I think that there's certainly a process underway, and the city's involved in that discussion, and whatever the outcome is, that certainly will be one factor that may make other options possible. So you're absolutely right. That's now an officially abandoned rail line.
Okay. I'm not sure the context here. Does allowing cargo bikes include bucket bikes designed to carry children or goods?
Well, I think that they would be probably in a separate category. We want them to be, far more, let's say, readily used and not encumbered by the by the regulations. So I guess we'll do our part to make sure that there's no pushback against using those kinds of well, I don't know if we'd call them cargo bikes, but anyways, with where you can put your kids in the front or anything else you like.
Okay, this is from College Ward, Cortland Park. How do you integrate the transportation plans with the official plan, which relies on new transportation for our area, that there isn't a commitment yet to local transportation project? Two, there has been widespread flash flooding in our area.
Well, the first question in terms of how to integrate the two, the active transportation plan is a subset of the overall transportation master plan. They're fully integrated. So everything, every goal or objective that we put in the active transportation plan shows up in the transportation master plan. They're not different, and including the overall budgets. There is an attempt to obviously tie the various networks together. the strong intent to bring active transportation links into transit hubs and so on. So the second question, I'm not sure I really understood the, I'm not sure if there's any other commentary there on the second point. Councillor, we'll have to see if anyone follows up with a question with more details, maybe.
Just for context, it's an older neighborhood that has not kept up with the modernization of infrastructure. They still use culverts. There's no sidewalks.
Mm-hmm.
The neighborhood is about 65 years old. And so as infill progresses, and we've had engaged conversations with the official plan, the concern is as the neighborhood receives more density, the infrastructure has not kept pace.
Right.
And so that's the context.
Right. Well, what I can say about our pedestrian plan is we'll take the priority missing links on sidewalks, and we do have a toolkit that we can apply in cases where there's a rural cross-section that ditch. Sometimes we can't quite do it, but we will try, and there's almost always something we can do to improve pedestrian conditions. So we don't reject those kinds of older roads in terms of at least when we're adding our sidewalks.
Thank you. Sorry about that. My internet cut out and came back, so I didn't realize I came back muted. There was another question about provincial standards. Did you manage to answer that for sidewalks, curbs? It was from the same Cortland Park question.
I think there, depending on how detailed that comment is, there's some general standards on curb height and so on, which are best practices. And actually they have to do with managing snow plow blades and so on. So in terms of provincial standards, they do apply in terms of accessibility. So for example, there has to be a 4% or lower slope. There needs to be tactile devices at crossings. And certainly it has a powerful impact on pedestrian facilities where they cross at signals. We have to virtually redo our signals to meet the new AODA regulations that have to do with having a push button nearby, not meters away, as well as having all the right both tactile and audible signals when you're crossing. So if that was the intent, the AOD accessibility for external pathways came into force in 2017. And as a regulation, we have only very, very limited exceptions that we rarely use. And so we do follow them.
Okay. There was a note in that question about adequate street widths for emergency access, and that would be a city standard that absolutely there's a minimum street width.
Yes, thank you. Will the updated transportation master plan address construction activity blocking active transportation infrastructure? This is a big thing right now with LRT. Crow cycling manual has excellent guidelines on good detours for cycling.
Yes, in fact, there is an Ontario guideline. I don't want to quote it. It's like, well, it's one of the book numbers that is used all the time to decide how detours are actually implemented. And I have, on a positive note, seen a big difference in how seriously active transportation detours are taken now compared with 10 years ago. So I think we do have our own Ontario book, and maybe Deb, you can check it at, I think book 13 or something, and just put it in the text. And so that would be the book that is, I think, referenced most strongly. And so I think that is not something we would have planned to make specific points about in the active transportation plan. since it has a home in that sort of engineering guideline.
Okay, thank you. Will the new plan include funding for local neighborhood connections so people can use bikes for small tests as well as planned bike trips?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the maybe shifts in focus from 2013 to this time around. We do want to emphasize more on community trips. And that also helps people in suburban areas, get out more on their bikes to do exactly those kinds of trips. So the answer is yes, it's ranked very highly, weighted very highly when we're looking at projects.
It certainly is in my book. So, and particularly with all of us being at home right now, I think we're all feeling that's a really important thing. Okay, because my internet went down and up, I'm just checking to see where I am here for questions. Give me a second. The bike paths are now way too dangerous to accommodate cyclists and walkers. Can they not be widened for everyone to use? It's a question for everyone.
Well, I do think we discussed that previously, and so we are taking opportunities to do widenings. For example, on the Trillium pathway, there are definitely going to be wider crossings at roads because we separate the bikes and peds there. And long term, we are looking harder at solutions where we'll have a separate cycling facility and sidewalks. So, and so the answer is yes. We always look at that, and we do look at those options for either bypass routes, wider multi-use pathways, or a split between the bicycle and pedestrian park.
Okay. And can segregated bike lanes, i.e. complete streets, be the norm instead of painted lines?
I think we'll probably, I think depending on the class of road and the speed of traffic and so on, segregation is the only solution. And so, for example, we're not going to do again on a new roadway what we did on Hunt Club, where we took a heavy industrial traffic high-speed road and painted a bike lane by the side of it. We certainly won't do that again. However, there are other roadways where potentially a painted buffer on a lower speed road may be a good solution. And we do need to find sort of practical solutions so that we can actually get a network that's connected in a reasonable period of time, and then follow up maybe later with different degrees of segregation. So ultimately, we're targeting on a level of stress, and there's a bunch of factors there, of which curb separation is only one.
Okay.
Theresa, can I jump in there?
Sure.
I think it's important for staff to talk about when a road is repaved and triggers, in most cases, paint, versus when a road is redesigned, which triggers much safer cycling infrastructure. People are frustrated when they see Riverside Drive repaved. You and I both know through our conversations that needs segregated cycling infrastructure. That budget was probably going to be 4 or 5 times more. And really the budget and scope was simply to repave the road. So can you just help folks understand why when a road is repaved, that doesn't trigger segregated cycling infrastructure?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So we do have, one change from 10 years ago is that we proactively look at every repaving job and ask the question, what can we do to improve active transportation conditions? Now, it's a massive step to change curb lines, because there's just huge costs in that, including moving catch basins and so on. That's not in the scope of most repaving jobs. However, we do have examples of repaving jobs we're able to do a 4 to 3 lane conversion, put in cycling facilities, although they're painted. If you look at the upcoming repaving of Innes Road, which is a pretty big, fast road, We can't put in segregated facilities, but we are going to skinny down the travel lanes and put a buffer in beside the bikes. And as part of repaving, we're going to add a small island and some curb protection at a corner. So we do what we can. Now, the other road rebuild is what we call an integrated program, where we're going to rip out absolutely everything, often all the way down to all the underground utilities. Now, at that point in time, it's not a question of cost generally in terms of what you put back in terms of hard surfaces. It's a question of deciding how you're going to use that space and the trade-offs that we're making. So if you look at recent examples, Elgin being a very good one, Main Street being another one, we did actually look at the cost, for example, Main Street with or without bike tracks, and it turned out to be a little bit cheaper with bike tracks because the road base was a little bit less expensive. But fundamentally, it's a decision of we have so much space, how do we use it? And so that's the opportunity to put in the best facilities possible. Now, in the case of Elgin, that debate was done in depth. And it was decided to really emphasize the pedestrian domain on Elgin.
Thank you. What data does the city use to evaluate if women and girls are equally being encouraged to be active in their transportation? I like that question. Well,
we have instituted through our traffic safety group the intention, and we started to do some counting of the gender split, if you will, just to look at that as a metric, because it's well known that if you have a good even gender split, the expectation is that your facilities are comfortable enough for everyone to use. And in our origin destination surveys, which, well, the next one's going to be perhaps a year out, we also have that data so we can track it over long periods of time. Also, it's also true that typically mothers have a much more complicated, and they're using a lot more local routes, when they're in the business of raising a family and so on. And so that's another lens that I think we want to make sure we look at. So those are the two things we're doing, is making it as comfortable as possible for all users and tracking our progress in that metric between genders.
Great, thank you very much. I know when I started commuting, there was hardly any women commuting back 30 plus years ago. It's getting much better.
I used to come in from Orleans every day downtown to the Museum of Nature, and every morning it was just like guys on road bikes drafting each other down the parkway. It has changed completely in 25 years. Yes, which is very healthy. A River Ward question. Maryvale is a needed north-south route, but discontinuous bike lane markings make it less safe, not more. Is it possible to at least open the north-south path beside it in the farm to bikes?
Well, I think the path that we're talking about here is one that was built by a community group. I'm sure the councillor is aware of it, with where it's restricted to pedestrians only. So I'm not sure what sort of influence we'll have in changing that, but we certainly do intend to improve the roadway, and we've made some improvements, for example, on Fisher, and we'll continue to make some improvements. In terms of the experimental farm, we have reached out to them. They are obviously a big factor in cycling connectivity in that part of the city. And we hope that we can cooperate with them, and they'll be helpful in just improving that connectivity through their facilities. So I appreciate that particular question, but I'm not sure how much influence we have on it. But that doesn't mean we can't look at other ways to solve the problem.
Great, thank you. Has the city considered numbering routes in the cycling network and providing signage? Well, the NCC does. I don't know if they number it, but they certainly sign it.
Well, the answer to that is yes, we have generated a numbering system. for our crosstown bikeways. You can see it on Geo Ottawa, and we do put up signs once we complete a section. We're not going to sign a route that's discontinuous, but if you look at the 12 kilometers I mentioned on crosstown bikeway number 2, there are signs all the way along that route telling you where to turn and so on.
Okay, great.
We also have signs for some of the neighborhood routes. For example, the Nepean Trail has some signs, and we have other ones like that that are not the crosstown routes, but can help people get through them, particularly since there's a lot of turns.
Okay. Another question about overpasses. It's great that they're being identified, but they can't exist in isolation. I think you've pointed that out. Will cycling links from existing paths to the 417 overpasses be included? Maitland is the one that they're focusing on, from Leicester to Garfield. So
the answer is, when we started our functional design work with the MTO, it was 2018. We also did a parallel project to do a functional design of the connections to those overpasses, because it's very true that one without the other is limited. So we will pick the ones that are most critical and get them done as soon as we can within the next plan. So the way I think of it is, the overpasses we absolutely have to do, because we won't get that chance for 75 years. And then we'll pick what we can afford within the next plan in terms of connectivity, and do as much of that as we can in the next 10-year period. But it will be on our plan of record. And should there be any other reconstruction of roadways, we'll see those facilities come in at that time as well.
great, thank you. Has the city estimated the amount of tourist revenue that may come from a superior cycling network?
No, I don't believe I've seen that kind of study. I'd love to see someone take it on. And we are speaking with the folks in Tourism Ottawa to kind of highlight the city's leaps and bounds improvements in cycling. And we have lots of also attractive rural cycling routes. And so I think it is a highlight for tourism, and we're going to reach out to them. And we've had some small steps within our active transportation plan to do that promotion. And it is absolutely going to be one of the policy items going forward to make sure that, we can leverage what we have for tourism as well.
That would be great. I think that's something I see in other places, not just biking downtown, but to have solid routes that go to long distances. And I think there's very, very possible to develop them.
And I also would like to add that doing long routes where you can tie in LRT portions is another, huge positive that we're going to have now that we didn't have before. But I'm sorry, Councillor, you were going to move on.
No, that's fine. That was a great add-on. River Ward, any plans to update Fisher and its cycling infrastructure, etc.? The pedestrian crossing at Tunis forces cyclists into the car lane. There's shadow markings, then a bike lane, then no bike lane. The intersection at Dines, I know exactly where that is, that was mentioned earlier, forces cyclists off the road, then back on, or on the road after the intersection beyond Dines. There are no cycling-friendly marker sharrows. Pardon me.
I think that if you look at the next plan, I think that Fisher is one of the routes with the most potential. So we certainly welcome, input there. That particular curb that was added at Tunis was very unfortunate. We have lots of internal discussions about that. And I'm not sure if we're going to sort of, get in there and modify it, but maybe I'll raise it internally. We can talk about it some more. But the broad, thrust of the question, which is, can we improve Fisher? I think that's a very good route. We should absolutely put some focus on.
Excellent. This is another River Ward.
Theresa, can I just add to Fisher? The city ran out of room at Tunis to require a minimum standard width for a bike lane on both sides of the street without shaving the travel lane, you either have to expropriate from people's front lawns on the west side or go onto the federal land on the east side. And the feds have said no. And people on Fisher have loudly said they do not want any woods touched. So that's why the city's bike lane ends at Tunis, and you travel 10 meters to the east on the experimental farm MUP and take that northbound. So cyclists, if they want to stay on a segregated lane, turn right at Tunis, travel 10 meters, and you're on a MUP. But for locals, it doesn't make sense that the city would have the bike lanes and then all of a sudden at Tunis it ends. But the issue is they ran out of space.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. That's adding some background I may not have been aware of. Thank you.
Great. There's another River Ward question. With Sawmill Creek scheduled to have significant work done to repair the pathway, will there be a safe alternative route? A painted line on the airport parkway with speeds of 80 to 120 kilometers an hour is not safe.
We'll have to get back, Councillor, with that, because if there's going to be some rework, there will be some kind of detour plan that's done by the team that's doing the work, and we'll see what it is and make sure that gets shared. But it's not a project we would be running, so we'll have to follow up with the right team with that for that information.
It won't be on the parkway. It will not be on the airport parkway.
Good to know. This is a River Kitchissippi Ward question. What can be done about bike lanes suddenly ending at busy intersections? Kirkwood traveling south at Carling, 416, for example. There is a bike lane all along Kirkwood, and then you cross north, the north side of Carling. You need to merge with traffic under the highway.
Yeah, that's in Kitchissippi. So I responded in the chat that is exactly the kind of missing link that I think staff are very interested in hearing about tonight. To the best of my knowledge, there's no plan to fix that. And that is the kind of major barrier that prevents people from getting around. I'm frequently through there on my way to, I go to a bunch of Riley's events at the community center, and Carlington Community Health Center is up there, which serves the western half of Kitchissippi Ward. And it can be very difficult to cross Carling, and that Island Park Drive, Maryville is just sketchy. And to the best of my knowledge, there's no plan to improve that. I have to assume that, as Carling becomes more BRT focused, eventually LRT focused, that it would be redone. But at this point, no, I don't know of any plan to fix that. But it's something that I would love to see addressed in the TMP with their network route and the gaps that are going to be required.
Okay. This is another River Ward. Walkley from McCarthy to Airport Parkway on-ramp has a planned maybe upgrade to reduce motor traffic lanes to one each direction and add segregated bike lanes and improve sidewalks. Is there any plan thinking to continue this onto Bank Street to provide improved access to Walkley Transitway and the future O train station and the planned Bank Street complete streets?
The answer is yes. We are actively planning, and we're right up to our elbows in making sure that the new structure that's being rehabbed over the O train line is wide enough to accommodate that future facility. So yes, the exact intent is to get all the way from Bank Street to Riverside, and that will likely, certainly currently, we believe that includes some so-called road diets, conversion for parts of the roadway. And I know, Councillor, I think obviously you're very familiar with that as well, but the answer to the question is fundamentally yes, absolutely, we're working on that plan.
Great. This is for college. When is baseline and POW transportation getting updated in the plan?
Well, I guess the question is that maybe about the intersection or?
Prince of Wales, I guess.
Yeah, Prince of Wales. Well, I think if you look at the baseline BRT plan, all the intersections are going to get completely rebuilt when that project gets through. And so right now, the designs are actually available if people are interested in what's coming down the pipe. However, the funding is still an open question.
Okay, I'm just going to read a couple more questions because we're getting right at the end here. Okay, everyone's okay with that? If you didn't get your question answered, you can still forward it to us and we'll get answers from staff. Okay, another River Ward, Riverside Southwestern Community Uplands has massive potential for becoming a 15-minute community. Is there money available, grants to improve infrastructure? That might be a broader question. I don't know if they're talking about the cycling or just in general.
Well, I think that I think that the answer is a more general one where all of our programs can apply across the city. So it just really has to be the question of distilling down what each program would or should or could do in that area, as opposed to some blanket pot of money being applied in one area. I mean, that sometimes happens, but I'm not aware that that's the plan here.
Okay. And Bay Ward, regarding the 417 overpasses, are there any plans to change the roads to slow traffic? Because currently speeds are 50, but traffic will typically go at least 60, sometimes 70, as the roads are 4-lane and encourage high speeds. Excuse me. Active transportation users don't use this infrastructure in these spots because they don't feel safe.
I think the biggest part of the answer to that question is to provide segregation, increase safe crossings at the ramps and so on, and including slowing down the traffic speed at the crossing points on ramps. And that's going to be the primary focus. Now, it's likely that maybe some of the travel lanes will be slightly narrowed, and that may slow traffic down to some extent. But the primary solution there is segregation on those high-speed arterials.
Okay, great. And this will be our last question, I guess. Will extra funds come to the active transportation work via the city's low carbon prioritizations? How are we funding it?
The Energy Evolution Plan has some very ambitious goals for CO2 reduction that do lean to a certain extent on active transportation. So they provide a signal into the debate, which will happen in about 2 years when we look at the total pot for the transportation budget, and sort of that debate will happen then. Our job right now in terms of the list of projects is to provide enough headroom for the projects so that if more money is put in through all the mechanisms that has been added in the past, both internal, extra money from council, as well as federal and provincial money, we'll know where we want to spend it. So I think that will have a big impact in how that, that basket is balanced, but that process will occur slightly later. It won't be done by this fall.
And I think it helps that people like yourselves are coming out to these meetings and pushing for this infrastructure. The more voices, the better. It puts pressure at all levels. I think there's going to be a federal election sometime. Put pressure there. Tell them what your municipality needs to do its job. This is exactly what we need. So I think we can wrap up. I'll do a roundtable quickly with our councillors just to wrap up. I'll start with you, Riley.
Thank you. I think I read a comment tonight that said you can't initiate larger projects without considering active transportation. And I think that is the main theme, that we can't consider even LRT projects, larger road redesign projects without having the active transportation component. It's a must. They go hand in hand, and really we're established wards and we're trying to make significant changes to the infrastructure in already established communities. So that's somewhat challenging, but it has to be done. It has to be done. Vulnerable road users need to be safe when they get out there. And so we need to work with our communities and staff to get this done. And certainly I know that's the commitment from the councillors who are here tonight, but we need to have that ongoing pressure from the public to move this forward. So I think the feedback tonight has been fantastic. Keep it coming. And I know there's a strong commitment to move in this direction. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Riley. Kitchissippi?
I'll just say thank you very much. It's interesting to hear the perspectives about the gaps. I did a session, I put it in the chat once or twice this winter about how we can fund cycling infrastructure. And I think my takeaway message from that was the very first thing we need to do is we need to have the wish list. There are a variety of mechanisms that can be used to fund better cycling infrastructure. There's a number of policies towards which we can move, but the most important thing is to understand, where do you want the cycling infrastructure to go? And once we have lines on a map and once we have concept plans, the funding will flow eventually, faster or slower, depending on how quickly City Council wants to make that happen. And so putting the network gaps on the table and the priorities for the community on the table tonight is a really critical first step. The most important thing that you can do to accelerate cycling infrastructure is to elect politicians who consider that to be a priority. City councillors, a mayor, MPPs, MPs. There are a lot of things that we've talked about here tonight as if, oh, you couldn't possibly put segregated cycling infrastructure there because there's no rebuild that's happening. Well, in theory, we could proactively do so, but it costs money. And that is a political decision to make as to whether or not we want to allocate those resources. So please elect politicians who are committed to improving active transportation in Ottawa in order to ensure that the funding is there to actually build the kind of network that we're talking about this evening. Thanks, Theresa.
Okay, thank you. College Ward.
Thank you, Rick Chiarelli here. I think, first of all, I want to thank everybody for participating in this. And I think it's important to emphasize that if you have a priority that you think needs to be recognized or a change that you want to see, you have to write that into us. And if you do that, we will be able to cite it and explore it and make it happen. If it's never written into us, and if nobody's ever expressed the priority, it does not become a priority. So things become a priority around here by people insisting that they are a priority. So please do that. I have the same issue with communities when they say they've seen people breaking into houses and stuff in their neighborhood, but no one ever calls the police. Like you must register the fact that you think something's a priority here, and then we'll be able to do something. And I think members of council here have done, although there are always a lot of criticism, they've done a pretty good job at evolving this over the last 10 years. If you look at where it was 10 years ago, it is much better now. And that's important to remember. And it's important to remember as well that we have to get the political will to make these things happen. Aside from registering the priority, you need to remember that ironically, it's car drivers who must support these things as well, because they're contributing a lot of money and you rely on a lot of their support to make this happen. So it shouldn't become a war between car drivers and cyclists or car drivers and scooter drivers. So if we keep that in mind, there was a big change in the 1970s that made public transit very important in Ottawa. And that big change was a sudden recognition on the part of car drivers that that form of transit was important and that they benefited even if they weren't using it. So we got to make that point with car drivers as well. So thank you for being here, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I just want to say I really appreciate the questions and the chat, the opportunity to talk with each other. I could see lots of chat, and that's really important because we're talking about 4 wards of substantial size and lots of things to cover here. I really appreciate it. I love the idea of the tourism, by the way. I think that's one of those things that you can kind of sell to the city too, of even if they're not into cycling, they can see that brings people in. And I think that that's a very positive. So, so we have, I'll let Zlatko and Deb wrap up on what's next for active transportation planning with the city.
All right, well, I think the last note we have, I don't know, I seem to have lost my ability to share the screen. Have I? Anyways. Perhaps, Deb, you can add in the chat the links to the TMP plan update process. So we have a website called Engage Ottawa so that you can keep track of all these steps and when the debate moves to finances or mode share and so on. And we also have a newsletter called Cycling in the City, and that shares with you all the new projects that we have across the city if you're interested to see what's happening. And in terms of the next step, we are looking for the councillors' priority feedback, hopefully by the end of this month in terms of projects. Then we're going to go off and whittle down that list so we can present to the public what we think should be in the next 10-year plan. And that will have lots of headroom, as a councillor mentioned, in case we get additional funding. And that is what we're hoping to show in the fall. And people can then comment on those proposals.
Thank you for that reminder. And so keep your wish list coming. We have to send our wish lists in, but our wish lists are really your wish list. So let us know. So that drop dead date is it the 28th?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. So and we'll send in. Keep on dreaming. We need more of it. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your evening. Thanks for coming out.
Thanks.